Captain Reese Calder stepped onto the frozen surface of the planet Varos 7, his boots crunching against the thick snow as cold wind howled around him. The world was silent, buried in ice, a place long forgotten by the rest of the galaxy. It was once a colony, but war and time had turned it into a dead planet. Reese wasn't here for beauty or peace. He was a salvager, a man who chased signals and stories buried deep in space. This time, the signal he followed was strange, very old, and definitely not human. His ship, the Arrowhead, hovered nearby, heat shields glowing faintly in the cold. He pulled his heavy coat tighter and released a swarm of small, scanning drones into the air. They zipped out over the snow, searching, pinging, and then one of them beeped louder than the rest. Reese walked quickly across the icy slope, following the signal. He dropped to his knees and brushed away snow and frozen dirt, revealing a smooth, dark surface beneath. It was metal, but not like anything from Earth black with golden lines that pulsed faintly, alive with weak energy. He called up the full scan, and the outline appeared on his screen. It was a pod, alien in design, long and sealed tight, buried under layers of frozen rock. Reese took out his cutting tools and began digging. It took him nearly 2 full days. Storms came and went, and he nearly froze more than once, but he didn't stop. Something deep inside him said this was important, something more than salvage. Finally, the top of the pod was exposed, and Reese stood over it, breathing heavily, staring down at the golden runes glowing beneath the ice. With a long exhale, he placed his gloved hand on the hatch, pulled out a plasma torch, and began to melt the seal. Steam rose into the cold air as the metal hissed and opened with a heavy sound. Inside was darkness at first, and then lights flickered on, revealing the interior 2 tall, crystal-like chambers filled with mist. Reese stepped back in shock as he saw what was inside. 2 women, both strange and beautiful, with pale blue skin and silver-white hair that floated gently in the stasis fluid. Their faces were calm, eyes closed, their bodies covered in thin silver suits. They looked so alive, as if frozen just yesterday, even though everything around them was ancient. The machines around the chambers blinked red. Their life support was failing. Reese didn't wait. He dropped his pack, pulled out power cells, and started attaching them to the chamber's ports. Sparks flew. He cursed it under his breath, rewiring. Broken connectors. The system flickered, then steadied. The red lights turned yellow, then green. The chambers pulsed with power again, stable for now. Reese slumped to the ground, heart racing. He had just saved 2 alien lives. He didn't know who they were, where they came from, or why they were here. He only knew he couldn't walk away. Not now. Snow began falling again, light and cold, covering the ground around him. Reese looked up at the sky, clouds swirling over a dead world. He was alone, far from help, far from any fleet or base. But he had found something no one else ever had. 2 alien women, still alive after who knows how long, buried under a world of ice. He set up a protective shield around the pod and radioed the Arrowhead for a retrieval lift. As the small ship hovered down to collect them, Reese kept watching the women. They didn't move. Not yet. But their presence filled the air with a strange feeling, like something ancient and powerful had just taken its first breath after a long sleep. Reese didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know what galaxy-wide storm he had just triggered. But as the pod lifted into the shuttle and the doors closed behind him, he felt something stir deep in his chest, a feeling that this wasn't just salvage anymore. This was the start of something much bigger than him. Something that might save humanity, or doom it. A soft hiss filled the quiet shuttle as the chambers began to open, warm air mixing with the cold mist that leaked out. Reese stood ready, muscles tense, heart pounding in his chest. The alien sisters lay still for a moment, then the first one stirred. Her fingers twitched, her breath hitched, and her glowing violet eyes opened slowly. She gasped for air and tried to move, her weak body collapsing forward. Rhys caught her gently, steadying her as she looked up at him in confusion and fear. Her voice, soft and strange, came out as barely a whisper. She asked where she was, her tone filled with wonder and sadness. Her skin felt cold, her hair clung to her face, and her eyes were full of centuries of silence. Rhys helped her sit up, wrapping a blanket around her thin shoulders. Just as he turned to check on the second chamber, it opened with a sharp click, and the second sister stepped out quickly, much stronger. She had a warrior's posture, her stance protective and ready. Her eyes landed on Rhys, and in a blink, she stood between him and her sister, blocking him with her body. Her expression was fierce, but she didn't strike. She was simply guarding the one she loved. Rhys raised both hands, calm and steady. He told her he wasn't an enemy, that he was the one who had saved them from the ice. The two sisters exchanged a glance, and after a long pause, the strong one knelt down and helped her sister to her feet. Then, to Rhys's surprise, both of them dropped to one knee before him, heads lowered, palms resting against the metal floor. The stronger one looked up at him and spoke with calm power. She said her name was Selah and her sister was Liari, and that they were the last daughters of the House of Varanth. Rhys had never heard of it, but the way they said it made him feel like it had once meant something great. Selah explained that their people had once ruled many worlds, but their home had been destroyed in a war they could not win. They had been placed in stasis to survive and one day return. But now, waking in his ship, they realized too much time had passed and their people were likely gone. Rhys guided them gently to seats as the shuttle rose through the icy clouds and returned to the Arrowhead, his salvager ship waiting in orbit. Inside the ship's warm hull, Liari moved more freely, curious, touching the walls and lights as if waking into a dream. Selah sat with Rhys, her voice still strong, though her eyes looked tired. She thanked him for saving them. She said that his actions had given them a second chance at life, and that such loyalty, shown by a stranger with nothing to gain, was something her people once honored deeply. She said that from this day forward, their loyalty belonged to him. Liari, quieter but more open in her emotions, added that their bond would be more than just loyalty. If he would accept it, she said, they would also give their love. Rhys didn't know what to say. He had saved lives before, pulled humans out of wreckage, but never anything like this, never ancient alien sisters with voices like music and eyes that held stars. He wanted to ask more questions, to understand who they really were, but Selah suddenly stiffened and turned toward the viewing screen. Something was wrong. Rhys saw it too. The ship's warning lights flickered and the long-range scanner beeped. A Zhureth hunter drone had entered the system. Rhys swore under his breath. Selah stood at his side immediately. She said the Zhureth had hunted her kind across the stars, relentless, cruel, and without mercy. Their war machines were half metal, half living, guided by cold logic and hatred. Rhys said they had been growing stronger in the galaxy, that many worlds feared them but dared not fight. Selah's expression hardened. She said the ice had hidden her and Liari for centuries, but now that they were awake, the enemy would sense their presence. They would not stop until the sisters were dead again. Liari took Rhys's hand, her touch soft but trembling. She asked if they should run, but Selah shook her head and said firmly that they must stand and fight. Rhys had never felt so outmatched before. He was a salvager, not a soldier. His ship wasn't built for war, but he saw the fire in Selah's eyes and the trust in Liari's, and he felt something stir inside him, something that hadn't moved since the wars he left behind. He nodded, swallowed hard, and turned back to the controls. If they were going to survive, it would take everything. He had. And if the Zhureth were coming for them, then they would learn that humans do not leave those they save behind. Inside the dim command room of the Arrowhead, Reese stood over the glowing console as red lights flashed across the screen. The long-range sensors had picked up something dangerous, a Zhureth hunter drone closing in fast. Reese cursed quietly and turned towards Sayla and Liari, who stood nearby. Sayla's face darkened the moment she heard the word Zhureth. Her hands clenched and her jaw tightened. She said that the Zhureth were the ones who had destroyed their world, their family, and everything they had known. Her voice was steady, but her eyes showed a storm of memories. She told Reese that these machines were not simple hunters. They were built to track survivors, even across the cold silence of centuries. Liari asked how they could have found them so quickly. Reese guessed that once the cryopod opened, a hidden signal must have gone out, something old and silent until now. Sayla nodded. She explained that the ice had likely shielded the signal. All these years, but once the pod was active again, the Zhureth would sense the old technology waking. Reese knew the Arrowhead wasn't built to fight warships, but he had no choice. He fired the engines and moved the ship toward an asteroid field nearby, hoping the thick rocks could help them hide. The Zhureth drone followed them through space, like a shadow, fast and cold. Reese pushed the ship harder, flying sharp between drifting boulders. Sayla and Liari quickly took their places at the ship's weapons and sensors. Their movements were smooth, like they had trained for this all their lives. They barely spoke as they worked together, reading the enemy's path, adjusting systems, and preparing for a fight they couldn't avoid. The enemy ship fired first. A bolt of glowing plasma shot past them, shaking the hull. Shields dropped to 50%. Sparks flew from the side panels. Reese tightened his grip on the flight stick and took the ship into a narrow crack between two spinning rocks. The Zhureth ship followed, calculating, adjusting, trying to lock on. Liari quickly loaded pulse torpedoes and tracked the drones. Movement. Sayla, her voice calm, told her to wait, to be patient. Reese realized then that Sayla could almost predict what the enemy would do, as if she had fought them 100 times before. The Zhureth drone prepared another shot, but Reese suddenly turned the ship into a tight spin, dropping them into a dark cloud of debris. In that moment, Sayla gave the order, and Liari fired. A stream of torpedoes flew into the cloud, and the drone tried to dodge, but it was too late. A bright explosion lit the void as the Zhureth ship broke apart. For a moment, everything was quiet. Reese breathed heavily, sweat on his face. He looked at Sayla, who simply nodded once, and at Liari, who smiled gently through the smoke and sparks, but the moment didn't last. Sayla turned back to the scanner, her face growing tense again. She said that what they just destroyed was only a scout small, fast, and alone. The real danger was coming next. The Zhureth never sent just one. The sisters knew how their enemy worked. Once a scout was destroyed, the larger fleet would follow, tracing the same path, looking to finish what the drone had started. Reese leaned over the console, eyes on the empty stars outside. He asked how many ships the Zhureth could bring. Sayla answered simply, enough to destroy a planet. Reese said they couldn't fight that many, not with just one salvager ship. Sayla didn't argue. She just said, then we don't wait here to die. Her voice was calm but cold, like iron beneath snow. Reese understood. They had to move. He plotted a new course deep space away from the known lanes. As the Arrowhead jumped to light speed, Reese sat in silence, trying to think. Sayla stood beside him, quiet but alert. After a moment, she asked Reese why he had saved them when he could have walked away. He looked at her and simply said, because I couldn't leave you behind. Sayla looked at him for a long time, then nodded slowly. Liari came closer and gently touched Reese's arm, her voice soft and honest. She said, "You saved us. Now we stay with you, no matter where this path leads." Reese looked at both of them, at these two sisters from a forgotten age, and realized that he was no longer just a salvager chasing old signals. He was part of something far greater, a fight for survival, for memory, and maybe even for the future of both their worlds. Somewhere out in the cold stars, the Jureth were gathering. And somewhere deep inside, Reese Calder made a quiet vow. He would not let the sisters fall again, not while he still had breath left in his lungs. The arrowhead raced through the stars, but the sense of peace was short-lived. Reese, Sayla, and Liari sat in silence, watching the scanners. Sayla had been right, the Jureth were not finished. Their drone had been a scout, and worse was already on the way. They had no time to rest. Reese guided the ship toward a nearby asteroid field, hoping to use it as cover. The space there was chaotic and dangerous, filled with drifting rocks and ancient wrecks. It was the perfect place to disappear or to die. As the arrowhead slipped into the field, a warning tone echoed through the ship. A second Jureth hunter had arrived. This one was larger, stronger, armed for battle. It flew with the grace of a machine, reading every movement, scanning for weakness. Reese cursed and pushed the engines harder, weaving through narrow paths between the spinning asteroids. Sayla took command of the weapon system, her hands moving swiftly across the controls, eyes sharp and steady. Liari locked into the targeting system, calculating every shot, her voice calm as she reported distances and enemy positions. The arrowhead was not a warship, but in the hands of the three of them, it moved like one. The Jureth ship fired first, a blast of red plasma tearing through a nearby rock. The shockwave threw the arrowhead sideways, alarms flashing. Reese fought to control the spin. Sayla fired back, but the shots bounced off the drone shields. "We need to be closer," she said. "Much closer." Reese gritted his teeth and dove the ship deep into the asteroid field, flying lower and faster than he ever had before. The rocks around them shifted and rolled, some the size of mountains. The enemy followed, undeterred. Another shot hit their side. Sparks flew from the ceiling. The shields dropped to 20%. Reese shouted over the noise, "We have to end this now." Liari studied the drone's pattern and pointed to a cluster of spinning debris up ahead. "There," she said. "We trap it." Reese understood. At once, he shot forward, straight into the heart of the spinning rocks. The Jureth followed again, closing fast, ready to kill. But this time, Reese pulled the ship into a sudden turn and circled around the largest asteroid. Sayla fired the ship's pulse cannons, drawing the drone's attention. It turned and flew right into the trap. At the same moment, Reese spun the arrowhead into position, and Liari fired a full barrage. Missiles, torpedoes, and plasma beams lit up the sky. The rocks around them exploded. The drone, caught between the debris and the blasts, was ripped apart. Fire and metal flew in every direction. The scanner went silent. The enemy was gone. Inside the ship, the lights flickered as systems rebooted. Reese leaned back in his seat, breathing hard. His hands trembled from the strain. Sayla stood slowly, checking the systems, and then gave a small, proud nod. Liari came over and placed her hand gently on Reese's shoulder. "You flew well," she said. Reese looked at her, and despite the tension still thick in the air, he smiled faintly. But Sayla's voice broke the moment. She had gone still, staring at the data on the screen. "This was just another drone," she said quietly, "not the fleet." Reese's smile faded. He knew what that meant. These were only the beginning small hunters sent to scout and test. The true force, the heart of the Jureth Armada, would be much worse. If they were already moving, it wouldn't be long before the galaxy felt their presence again. Sayla turned toward him, her expression cold but steady. "We have no more time to run," she said. "We must prepare for war." Rhys stared at the blinking stars on the map, each one a possible battleground. He had spent most of his life running from battles, fixing wrecks, and surviving. Now he was caught in something far bigger. But as he looked at Sayla, tall and proud, and Liari, gentle and fierce, he felt something different. These sisters didn't just want revenge, they wanted to protect what remained. Rhys stood slowly, his back aching, his mind already turning. "Toward the next move. Then we'll need allies," he said. "Weapons, ships, plans," Sayla nodded. "There may still be vaults hidden across the stars. My family hid many secrets before the fall." Liari added, "Some might still sleep beneath forgotten worlds." "Like we did." Rhys looked at them both. "Then let's wake them up." Outside the ship, the broken remains of the drone drifted among the asteroids. But far beyond, past the edge of the system, the true storm was already on its way. Rhys took the Arrowhead to Eclipse Station, a hidden outpost on the edge of the outer colonies where independent humans, smugglers, and old war veterans gathered. The station floated in deep space like a rusting wheel, spinning slowly above Silent Moon. Inside, the halls were filled with noise, traders shouting, ships docking, and captains discussing rumors from across the stars. Rhys walked through the crowd with Sayla and Liari at his side, both wrapped in cloaks to hide their alien features. People stared, sensing something strange in the air, but no one asked questions. Rhys made his way to the council chamber where a group of human leaders met behind sealed glass and guarded doors. He stood before them and spoke with urgency, telling them that the Jureth were coming, that he had already fought their drones, and worse was on the way. He told them about the ancient signal, about the buried pod, and about the sisters who had once ruled powerful worlds now lost to time. Sayla stepped forward then, removing her hood. Her glowing violet eyes swept across the room. She spoke in a calm, commanding voice and told the council who she was, what she had seen, and what would come if no one acted. She warned them that the Jureth would not stop with one system or one world. They would wipe out every race one by one, as they had before. Her voice echoed with power, the kind that made even hardened admirals pause. Liari stood beside her, quiet but fierce, adding that they had already destroyed 200 drones and that the next attack would be on a scale none of them were prepared for. The council listened, but their faces stayed hard. One of the admirals, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, leaned forward and said he had no reason to trust two aliens with forgotten titles. He said there were no records of the House of Varanth in human archives and that stories of ancient empires didn't win battles. Another council member, older and more cautious, said they could not risk sending ships based on warnings and legends. The galaxy was stretched thin already. The colonies had their own troubles. They needed proof. Rhys's hands tightened into fists. He told them again that the Jureth were real, that he had seen their machines and fought them, and that the next time he might not survive. But still, the council refused. No reinforcements. No supplies. No support. Rhys felt a deep anger rise inside him. He had come hoping for help, but found only fear and pride. He turned and walked out without another word. Sayla and Liari followed. Back on the Arrowhead, the sisters stood in silence for a moment. Then Liari gently touched Rhys's shoulder and asked what they would do now. Rhys looked at her and said, "We fight without them." Sayla nodded. Her voice was steady. "We still have old weapons hidden across the stars, vaults sealed before the fall. If they still exist, we can rebuild." Rhys asked how many there were. Selah closed her eyes, remembering, then said there were at least 7 each holding something different: ships, drones, weapons of power. Liari added that some were buried under ruins, others floating in lost orbit, waiting for someone with the right blood to open them. Reese looked at the map, already plotting the route. He didn't have a fleet, but he had something more rare: trust. He had the loyalty of 2 powerful sisters, and he had nothing left to lose. The 3 of them set off once again into deep space, traveling from one dead system to another. Each stop brought danger. Some vaults were hidden behind ancient traps. Others were buried deep under rock or ice. At one site, they were ambushed by pirates who tried to steal what they found, but Selah struck them down with precision, and Liari disabled their ships without firing a single fatal shot. At every vault, the ancient technology responded to Selah's touch. Doors opened. Lights came on. Warships powered up after sleeping for centuries. Drones swarmed to her signal. Old AI systems called her Heir of Varanth and offered their weapons. Reese helped restore the ships, fixing engines, welding broken panels, upgrading systems. He worked without rest, pouring everything he had into this growing force. After weeks of travel, the Arrowhead was no longer alone. Around it flew sleek silver fighters, long-range bombers, stealth scouts, and massive old capital ships brought back from the edge of history. Selah stood on the bridge of the largest one, a battle cruiser named Varanth's Vow, its hull scarred but strong. Liari controlled the drone fleet from a hidden command pod, her fingers dancing across glowing controls. Reese stood at the center of it all, not just a salvager anymore, but a leader. They called their new fleet the Iceborne, born from cold worlds and old power. They didn't wait for the Zhureth to strike again. They prepared to strike first. As their ships glided through the stars, Reese looked at Selah and Liari, 2 sisters who had lost everything, but still stood tall. And beside them, he felt ready. No counsel, no permission, no help. Just fire, steel, and the will to survive. The Iceborne fleet grew as the weeks passed, rising from the ashes of forgotten wars and frozen planets. Reese, Selah, and Liari moved from system to system, following ancient star maps, broken coordinates, and Selah's deep memory of what her people had once hidden. The galaxy was wide, and the House of Varanth had planned for its fall. They had left behind not only vaults of weapons, but secrets sealed in black boxes, dormant ships with locked minds, and codes only their blood could wake. Each world they visited brought challenges. One vault was buried under shifting ice on a dead moon, and it took 3 days of cutting through storms before they reached the door. Another was hidden in the core of a derelict space station crawling with wild machines that attacked anything that moved. On an old jungle world, vines wrapped around a crashed cruiser and strange creatures hissed from the shadows as the sisters walked through the overgrowth, searching for the control crystal buried in the heart of the wreck. Selah led with strength and precision, never hesitating. Liari moved like light and shadow, soft but fast, finding paths no one else saw. Reese stayed close, fighting off threats and repairing what he could. He had always been a scavenger, fixing dead things, but now he was helping bring something powerful back to life. One by one, ancient ships lit up, long-forgotten codes unlocked, and the AI systems greeted Selah as their commander. They activated repair drones, rebuilt their hulls, and filled the empty corridors with light. Reese felt something shift each time they added another ship to the fleet. The Arrowhead, once a small scavenger, now flew at the center of a rising storm. It was no longer a lonely vessel. It was a signal, a symbol, a banner for something greater. Selah chose to name the fleet not after her fallen house, but after their rebirth. She called it the Iceborne not just for where they had been found, but for what they had become. Born of ice, risen with fire. The Iceborne fleet soon numbered over 30 ships, each one a mix of old design and fresh repair. Fast interceptors, heavy destroyers, stealth vessels, and the pride of them all the Varanth's Vow, a warship that once ruled over 10 systems, now commanded by Sayla once again. It was massive, armored, with railguns that could tear through cruisers and shields made of layered crystal and plasma fields. Liari took command of the drone fleets, thousands of small fighters that could swarm and blind entire battalions. She controlled them through her mind, through systems that only she could fully understand, singing to the machines with ancient data songs. Rhys watched the sisters work and knew he stood beside legends. They never asked for thanks. They never looked back. But he saw their sorrow in the quiet moments, Sayla staring at the stars as if searching for lost voices, Liari holding an old crest in her hands while whispering prayers to names that no longer lived. Rhys never asked what they had lost, only what they wanted to protect now. One night, after a successful vault recovery, the three of them sat on the deck of the Varanth's Vow, looking out into space. Rhys asked them what they would do when the Joreth came. Sayla answered without fear, "We will not run, we will stand. If we fall as warriors, not shadows." Liari added softly, "We did not return to hide. We returned to finish what was started." Rhys nodded. He knew the time was coming. And it came sooner than he hoped. A scout ship reported a Joreth fleet forming near Doran's Reach, a human colony of over 1 million people. No defenses. No warning. It would be wiped out like so many others before. Rhys sent messages to the Eclipse Station, to the Council. That had once turned them away. He warned them again. But they didn't answer. They didn't believe. Sayla turned to the fleet and gave a single command: prepare for battle. The Iceborne moved as one, engines burning, shields glowing, weapons hot. For the first time in centuries, ships of the House of Varanth returned to war, not for glory, but for justice. Rhys stood on the bridge with Sayla and Liari beside him. The galaxy had forgotten them. The Council had ignored them. But they would not forget the people at Doran's Reach. The Iceborne would not arrive with banners or songs. They would arrive with silence, with fire, and with the strength of 3. Hearts that had refused to break. The Joreth Armada arrived at Doran's Reach like a dark wave, filling the skies above the peaceful colony with 10,000 ships, each one cold and mechanical, each built for destruction. The colony had no real defense, just old satellites, weak cannons, and a few small patrol vessels that were no match for what hovered above them. The people of Doran's Reach looked up at the sky and saw death coming. The Joreth sent no message, no warning. Their ships began powering their weapons, preparing to erase yet another world. But just before the attack began, space rippled, lights blinked, and the Iceborne fleet arrived. They came out of hyperspace like ghosts from a forgotten age sleek. Silver ships, massive war cruisers, fast fighters, and the towering battle cruiser Varanth's Vow. At the center of it all was Rhys, sitting on the bridge beside Sayla and Liari. The moment the enemy detected them, the Joreth changed formation, turning their ships toward this new threat. They sent a message into the void: surrender or be annihilated. Rhys didn't answer with words. He answered with fire. The battle began like lightning crashing through the stars. Sayla led the charge, her command voice clear and strong as she gave orders across the fleet. The Iceborne moved as if one being, every ship perfectly in sync, every weapon strike measured and deadly. Liari released the swarm drones, thousands of small fighters that danced through enemy fire like sparks in a storm. The Joreth tried to block them, but the drones moved too fast, slipping into weak spots and exploding inside their hulls. The sky lit up with explosions, twisted metal, and beams of energy slicing through the dark. Reese flew one of the fast cruisers at the front, dodging shots and weaving between ships, firing again and again. His hands moved by instinct, his heart pounding. Around him, iceborne ships exploded, their crews fighting to the last. The Jureth pressed harder, sending waves of heavy destroyers forward. Sayla directed the fleet to split and encircle them, flanking their strongest ships. Her voice never shook. Even as the enemy grew more aggressive, even as ships fell and systems failed, she stood tall and calm. But the enemy was vast. For every Jureth ship they destroyed, 2 more moved into position. The Iceborne were strong, but they were still outnumbered. The sky turned red with fire and smoke. Shields dropped. Engines failed. Reese's ship was hit by a heavy plasma blast and spun out of control. Alarms screamed, flames burst through the back of the ship, and Reese was thrown hard against the sidewall. He tried to get up, but pain shot through his ribs. The engine room had taken the worst of it. He crawled toward the control panel, smoke burning his lungs, trying to shut down the reactor before it exploded. Just as he reached it, part of the ceiling collapsed. He braced for the worst, but then she came. Laori, her eyes glowing with fierce light, crashed through the burning corridor. She didn't hesitate. She lifted the debris and pulled Reese out with surprising strength. "You said we fight together," she whispered. Reese coughed and nodded, too stunned to speak. She helped him into the escape pod and sealed the door, but stayed outside. "I'm not leaving you," he said weakly. She smiled, tears in her eyes. "Then let's finish this." She pressed a code into the wall, and the ship's AI rerouted power from the damaged engines to the weapons one last time. Then, guiding the burning ship like a final missile, they flew it into the heart of a Jureth dreadnought. The collision tore through the enemy line. The explosion lit the battlefield like a small sun, sending shock waves that rocked every ship nearby. Sayla, watching from the Varanth's Vow, gave the order for the fleet to push. The Iceborne moved like fury, charging into the broken ranks of the enemy, cutting deep, splitting the armada in 2. They didn't stop, even with systems failing. And ammunition low, they drove the enemy back. Sayla targeted the Jureth command ship, a massive hive core at the rear of the formation, and flew straight toward it. The ship's defenses opened fire, striking the Varanth's Vow over and over, but Sayla held her course. The shields shattered. Fire rolled across the hull, but she didn't blink. She activated the core weapon, an ancient energy lance buried in the ship's spine. With one final command, she fired it directly into the enemy flagship's center. The beam tore through the command ship and triggered a chain reaction that exploded across the Jureth control net. Without command, the enemy fleet fell into disarray. Some ships powered down. Others turned and fled. A few spun out of control and crashed into their own. The silence that followed was heavy and unreal. The Iceborne had held. Against all odds, they had won. The people of Doran's Reach sent out a signal across the stars, a signal of thanks, of awe, and of hope. The sky, once filled with death, was now filled with the glowing trails of the Iceborne ships drifting slowly through wreckage. Reese, injured but alive, stood on the broken deck beside Liari, who had pulled him from the flames. Sayla's ship floated silently, its hull burned, but still whole. The Jureth were not gone, but they had been broken. And now the galaxy knew that someone had the strength to stand against them. After the battle at Doran's Reach, the stars were quiet for a moment, as if the galaxy itself had paused to breathe. Wreckage drifted through space-broken pieces of enemy ships, shattered Iceborne vessels, and the glowing embers of fire still burning in the cold. Reese stood on the deck of a repair bay aboard the Varanth's Vow, his ribs bandaged, his arm in a sling, watching workers weld and patch the wounds of the mighty ship. Around him, engineers moved quickly. Drones zipped between. Twisted panels and quiet voices passed reports back and forth. Sayla walked toward him, her face tired but calm, dressed in a clean but scorched battle uniform. Beside her, Liari moved carefully, her steps slower than before, her eyes red from exhaustion but shining with pride. They stopped in front of Reese, and for a long moment no one spoke. Then Sayla simply said, "We did it." Reese looked at her, nodded, and let out a long breath he had been holding since the battle. Liari stepped closer, touching his hand gently. "You shouldn't have survived that crash," she whispered, "but you did." Reese gave her a faint smile. "Because you pulled me out," he replied. Again. The moment felt quiet and deep, like a promise passed without words. Then an alert sounded, breaking the silence. A new message had come in from the Central Human Council. Reese opened the transmission, and the face of the same admiral who once refused to help filled the screen. But this time, there was no arrogance, no doubt, only humility. The admiral said that the footage of the battle had spread across the systems, and that everyone now knew what the Iceborne had done. The colony had been saved. The Jareth had been broken, and humanity owed its survival not to governments or fleets, but to a scavenger, a lost warrior queen, and her sister. The council offered full support, now supplies, ships, and safe ports. But Reese said nothing. He simply closed the message. Sayla asked him why, and he said, "Because we didn't do this for them." Liari smiled softly. "We did it because no one else would." The fleet, still damaged but alive, gathered slowly near the quiet edge of the system. Survivors were counted, and lost names were spoken with honor. The Iceborne mourned their dead not with tears, but with silence and firelighting. One ship for every soul lost, sending them into the stars with honor. Sayla stood at the head of the ceremony, her voice steady as she named each one. Liari sang a soft, ancient melody words from her world that no one living remembered but her. Reese stood between them, his head bowed, his heart heavy, but also full of something deeper, pride, maybe, or peace. After the fires faded, Sayla gathered the captains. She spoke of what had been won, but warned what still remained. The Jareth were not destroyed. Their armada had scattered, but their hearts still beat somewhere in the dark. The Iceborne had won a battle, but not the war. And if they waited, the enemy would return. Reese stepped forward and said, "Then we don't wait. We go after them." The fleet murmured. Some were tired, some were wounded. But slowly they nodded. Sayla placed her hand on the control console and brought up a map, the hidden route toward the Jareth core worlds, a place no one dared go. But now they had reason. Now they had fire. Now they had something the enemy never expected: hope. As the ships prepared for the next journey, Liari stood alone with Reese on the viewing deck. She looked at the stars and whispered, "When we were frozen, I dreamed of fire and voices. I didn't know what it meant, but now I think I dreamed of you." Reese didn't know what to say, so he took her hand gently and held it. They stood together, not as human and alien, not as survivor and soldier, but as something new, something whole. Sayla joined them and looked out across the fleet, some ships old and cracked, others still shining, all of them reborn. We're buried in ice," she said softly. "But now we burn brighter than ever," Reese nodded. "And we're not done yet." The engines of the Iceborne roared back to life, lighting up the sky like comets. Their course was set, not to hide, not to wait, but to strike at the heart of the darkness before it rose again. The galaxy would remember the name of the Iceborne, and it would remember the day when one human pulled two sisters from the ice, and they swore loyalty, love, and war in return.